Have you ever felt like you have complete control over your life, that every success, every achievement is solely the result of your effort and skills? This is exactly what Nebuchadnezzar, the most powerful king of his time, believed. He ruled Babylon with unparalleled authority, overseeing a vast empire filled with wealth and splendor. His word was law, and he saw no obstacle too great, no goal beyond his reach. However, his arrogance blinded him to a fundamental truth. All power comes from God. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, considered one of the wonders of the ancient world, were a reflection of his grandeur and pride. Day after day, Nebuchadnezzar walked through the corridors of his palace, admiring everything he had built with great satisfaction. His military conquests, flawless administration, and strategic wisdom were all reasons for his self-praise. He saw no reason to bow before anyone, not even the God of Israel, whose people he had taken captive and whose sacred objects he had defiled. Is this not Babylon the Great, which I have built for my royal residence by my mighty power, and for the glory of my majesty? Daniel 4:30. Yet while Nebuchadnezzar basked in his pride, a shadow of warning loomed over him. The arrogance that fueled his heart was leading him down a dangerous path, one that would soon teach him an unforgettable lesson. God, in his infinite wisdom, had a plan to show the king that true authority does not rest in human strength, but in divine sovereignty. What Nebuchadnezzar did not realize was that his kingdom, no matter how glorious, was hanging by an invisible thread held by God's mercy. And soon, that illusion of control would crumble. One night, in the midst of his peace, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that deeply disturbed him. In his vision, he saw a massive tree, its crown reaching the heavens, its foliage providing shade to the beasts of the field and food to all living creatures. Its majesty was undeniable, and the king could not help but admire it. But suddenly, a powerful voice from heaven proclaimed a terrifying decree. Chop down the tree and cut off its branches, scatter its fruit, and let the animals that take shelter under it flee. Only the stump was to remain in the ground, bound with iron and bronze. Nebuchadnezzar awoke in shock, his heart pounding in his chest. Despite his wisdom and power, this dream left him unsettled. He summoned his advisors and magicians at dawn, but none of them could interpret its meaning. Frustrated and anxious, the king began to fear the worst. Something inside him told him that this was not just a mere night vision, but a divine message carrying a warning. The tree will be cut down, but its stump will remain bound with iron and bronze. Daniel 4:23. It was then that Nebuchadnezzar remembered Daniel, the prophet of God, whom he had taken captive from Judah. This man possessed a unique gift for unraveling mysteries and revealing hidden truths. With a mix of hope and fear, he commanded that Daniel be brought before him, convinced that only he could unveil the true meaning of the vision that troubled his soul. As the prophet approached the throne, the tension in the air was almost tangible. The king knew that Daniel's words would not be easy to hear, yet he could not ignore the urgency of the divine message. Uncertainty weighed heavily upon him like a shadow, and his pride began to waver in the face of the unknown. Daniel stood before Nebuchadnezzar with a solemn expression. From the moment the king described his dream, his face reflected both concern and compassion. The impatient ruler urged him to reveal its meaning without delay. However, Daniel remained silent for a moment, contemplating the words he was about to speak. Finally, taking a deep breath, he addressed the king with respect, but without sugar-coating the truth. "O king, may you live forever," Daniel began. "The tree you saw, so tall and strong, providing food and shelter for all, represents your kingdom. You, O king, have grown great and mighty, reaching the heavens, and your rule extends to the ends of the earth. But God has decreed that you will be stripped of your glory and humbled until you acknowledge that the Most High reigns over the kingdoms of men." The king's heart felt the weight of these words like a hammer. His mind, accustomed to thoughts of his own greatness, resisted accepting such a fate. But Daniel continued, You will be driven away from men and live among the wild animals. You will eat grass like cattle, and the dew of heaven will fall upon you for 7 periods until you recognize that only God is sovereign over all. Therefore, O king, heed my advice. Turn from your sins by practicing righteousness and show mercy to the poor. Perhaps then your prosperity will continue. Daniel 4:27. The hall fell into complete silence. Nebuchadnezzar, known for his fierce temperament and impulsive decisions, did not dismiss Daniel with anger, but with a lingering unease he could not hide. The prophet had spoken with honesty, offering an opportunity to avoid impending judgment. In the days that followed, Daniel's words echoed in the king's mind. Despite his pride, a small part of him wondered if it was still possible to change his fate. However, his hardened heart continued to rely on his achievements, and slowly the warning faded into a distant memory. A year passed since Daniel's warning, and Nebuchadnezzar continued living in the opulence of his palace, convinced that his kingdom was indestructible. Day after day, he walked the terraces of Babylon, admiring its grandeur. The towering walls, magnificent temples, and hanging gardens all stood as a testament to his greatness. With a satisfied smile, he paused to gaze at the horizon, telling himself that there was no king like him. One evening, as he walked on the rooftop of his royal palace, with the city spread out before him like a masterpiece of his own creation, he uttered words that sealed his fate. "Is this not the great Babylon I have built by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" The moment he finished speaking, a thunderous sound roared across the heavens. A voice descended from above, resonating with unwavering authority. "To you, King Nebuchadnezzar, it is declared, the kingdom has been taken from you." Daniel 4:31. In that instant, his mind was plunged into darkness. The reason he had once valued so much vanished like a fleeting shadow, and his once proud gaze turned hollow and lost. The king's majesty crumbled before the eyes of his servants, who watched in horror as he collapsed to the ground, babbling incoherently and crawling like an animal. Stripped of his dignity, Nebuchadnezzar was cast out of the palace and sent into the wilderness. There, surrounded by the vastness of nature, his appearance began to change. His body, once clothed in the finest robes, was now covered in filth, and his hair grew wild like the feathers of an eagle. His untrimmed nails lengthened and sharpened into claws. At that very hour, the word concerning Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled, and he was driven away from men. He ate grass like cattle, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven. Daniel 4:33. The laughter of the royal court turned into whispers of disbelief. The mighty king of Babylon now grazed like livestock, oblivious to the grandeur he once commanded. Seasons passed, and his pride withered under the weight of his condition, while nature taught him the lesson he had refused to learn when he still had the chance. Days turned into months, and months into years. Nebuchadnezzar wandered the fields, completely detached from human society. His mind, once sharp and strategic, was now reduced to an animalistic state. He moved through the fields like an ox searching for food, and slept under the open sky with no shelter but the stars. The grandeur of Babylon remained intact, but its king had been reduced to a humiliating existence, living among the beasts of the earth, unaware of his former splendor. Time, which he once believed was under his control, now moved on without him. His advisors and subjects, initially horrified by his condition, eventually accepted it as an inevitable fate. Nebuchadnezzar, once the most powerful man on earth, had become a forgotten shadow, trapped in a body no longer his own. His hair grew like eagle's feathers, and his nails became long and twisted, giving him an even more inhuman appearance. Until you acknowledge that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of men and gives them to whomever he wishes. Daniel 4:32. For 7 long years, Nebuchadnezzar lived in this state of humiliation, subjected to the will of God. Each morning brought the same routine, wandering the fields, feeding on grass, and enduring the cold of the night. The greatness that once defined him had completely faded, and the pride that had blinded him had been torn away. Yet even in his madness, a seed of humility began to take root deep within him. God had not finished with him. Every falling leaf, every ray of sunlight that touched his skin was a silent reminder that the Most High was in control. His humiliation was not the end of his story, but a necessary process leading to a greater truth. One day, when his time of humiliation had run its course, something changed within him. For the first time in years, he lifted his eyes to the heavens. His eyes, once filled with arrogance, now reflected profound humility. At that moment, reason returned to Nebuchadnezzar, along with the realization of a truth he had ignored all his life. Only God is sovereign, and all human power is fleeting before his greatness. But at the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my understanding returned to me. And I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever, whose dominion is eternal, and whose kingdom endures from generation to generation. Daniel 4:34. The king, now transformed by the experience, fell to his knees and acknowledged the sovereignty of God. His heart, once filled with pride over his achievements, now humbled itself before the creator of the universe. Babylon remained magnificent, but Nebuchadnezzar had learned that it was not his hand that sustained it, but divine grace. His restoration was immediate. His understanding was fully restored, and with it his position in the kingdom. His servants, witnessing his transformation, once again recognized his leadership, but this time from a new perspective. Nebuchadnezzar was no longer the same man consumed by arrogance. He was now a king who understood that his authority was granted by God and that his duty was to honor the Almighty. At the same time, my reason returned to me, and the glory of my kingdom, my majesty, and my splendor returned to me. Daniel 4:36. The lesson had been learned in the hardest way possible, but it bore fruit in his life. Nebuchadnezzar not only regained his kingdom, but also acquired wisdom he had never imagined. He now understood that true greatness lies not in earthly power, but in humility before God. The story of Nebuchadnezzar is not just a tale of humiliation and restoration, but an eternal lesson for all of humanity. His fall reveals the danger of excessive pride and the illusion of control over our lives. Like him, many people today trust in their own strength, accomplishments, and possessions without acknowledging that everything they have comes from God. God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. James 4:6. The experience of the Babylonian king reminds us that no matter how high we rise in life, pride can lead us to ruin. Nebuchadnezzar had to lose everything to understand this truth, but we have the opportunity to learn from his example before it's too late. At the end of his life, Nebuchadnezzar left a powerful testimony: the Most High rules over all things. His transformation teaches us that God does not humble us for his own pleasure, but out of love, so that we may recognize our dependence on him and find true peace in his will. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. 1 Peter 5:6. Nebuchadnezzar's story invites us to reflect on our own lives. Are we relying on our own strength or trusting in God's grace? True greatness does not lie in what we possess, but in our humility before the one who gives and takes all things. Nebuchadnezzar learned through a harsh lesson that all power, glory, and wealth are fleeting in the face of God's sovereignty. His story serves as a reminder that human greatness is limited, and true wisdom lies in recognizing God as the ultimate source of authority. The conclusion of his story is a testament to divine mercy. Though he was humbled, God gave him a second chance to correct his ways and proclaim his greatness. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and glorify the King of heaven, because all his works are true and his ways are just, and he is able to humble those who walk in pride. Daniel 4:37. This story teaches us that we should not wait for adversity to strike before acknowledging our dependence on God. Humility is the path to true exaltation, and recognizing God in all our ways is the beginning of wisdom. Nebuchadnezzar was not only restored to his throne, but also to a right relationship with God, understanding that everything he possessed was a divine gift meant for his glory. Today, this story continues to resonate as both a warning and an invitation, warning those who live in pride and self-sufficiency, and inviting those who are willing to surrender to God's will. The sovereignty of the Most High remains, and each of us is called to recognize his dominion over our lives.